Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg said Wednesday he has probable cause to hold the Trump administration in criminal contempt of court over its willful disregard of his order last month to halt flights transferring immigration detainees from the U.S. to the notorious Secat mega prison in El Salvador. Judge Boasberg noted Trump officials have since failed to rectify or explain their actions, giving the administration 1 week until April 23rd to respond. On Wednesday, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen traveled to El Salvador, but was blocked from meeting with Kilmer Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father who was sent to the mega prison on the March flights in what the Department of Homeland Security has admitted was an administrative error. Both the Trump administration and the government of President Nayib Bukele has refused to release and return Abrego Garcia. Senator Van Hollen spoke to reporters in San Salvador after meeting with the Salvadoran vice president.
I'm asking President Bukele, under his authority as president of El Salvador, to do the right thing and allow Mr. Abrego Garcia to walk out of a prison, a man who's charged with no crime, convicted of no crime, and who was illegally abducted from the United States.
Senator Van Hollen said the vice president of Salvador told him the country would keep Abrego Garcia locked up since the U.S. government is paying El Salvador to do so. The senator also said more members of Congress are planning to visit El Salvador soon. Van Hollen's visit came as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth welcomed El Salvador's defense minister to the Pentagon. After headlines, we'll be joined by Vince Warren of the Center for Constitutional Rights for more on the story. Meanwhile, Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents are continuing to carry out violent raids and arrests across the United States. Videos emerged showing ICE agents smashing a car window and forcibly removing a man this week in New Bedford, Massachusetts, even after he explained to officers he was not the person they'd been looking for and that he was waiting for his lawyer to arrive. Juan Francisco Mendez is a 29-year-old father from Guatemala who's currently in the midst of immigration proceedings to finalize his asylum status in the United States. In California, faith leaders and community members gathered Wednesday to protest Trump's plans to turn the notorious, now shuttered Dublin women's prison, dubbed the Rape Club, into an ICE detention center. This is Reverend Deborah Lee.
He's trying to get billions of dollars to go towards the Department of Homeland Security for ICE operations, to move people, to arrest people, to detain people, and to deport people. We all know that this will make our communities more unsafe. And we know that he cannot deport people without detention beds, which is why this place is so important, that we not allow more detention beds to open up here in Northern California.
The IRS is reportedly considering revoking Harvard's tax-exempt status in retaliation for Harvard refusing to collaborate with the Trump administration over its demands related to DEI and criminalizing free expression. The Trump administration has already moved to block over $2 billion in federal funds for Harvard. The Justice Department suing the state of Maine after it refused to comply with a Trump administration order banning trans athletes in school sports. This is U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi.
The state of Maine is discriminating against women by failing to protect women in women's sports. We are seeking to have the titles returned to the young women who rightfully won these sports. And we are also considering whether to retroactively pull all the funding that they have received for not complying in the past.
Maine's Governor, Janet Mills, responded in a statement, quote, "This is not just about who can compete on the athletic field. This is about whether a president can force compliance with his will without regard for the rule of law that governs our nation. I believe he cannot," Governor Mills wrote. Israel's military has stepped up a series of deadly strikes on tent encampments for displaced Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, as the United Nations warns Israel's renewed assault has uprooted about 500,000 people since Israel shattered the ceasefire in March. Earlier today, an Israeli airstrike targeted tents in the Jabalia refugee camp, killing at least 7 people. Separately, 10 Palestinians were killed in an overnight attack on a tent encampment in Khan Yunis, with children among the dead and wounded.
A 12-year-old disabled child. He burned to death in his wheelchair. We carried him. Even his bones had melted as we pulled him out. This is the child's wheelchair. A child, 12 years old.
Palestinians are marking the annual Prisoners' Day holiday with marches demanding the release of political prisoners. Rights groups say there are nearly 10,000 Palestinians currently held in Israeli jails. 400 of them are children. More than a third are being held without charge under Israel's so-called administrative detention policy. On Wednesday, a lawyer for the jail director of Gaza's Kamel Edwan Hospital, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, said his client had experienced beatings, mistreatment, and torture inside Israel's notorious Ofer prison. The lawyer, who was last able to visit Dr. Abu Safiya on March 19th, said, quote, "He's suffering greatly. He's exhausted from the torture, the pressure, and the humiliation he's endured to force him to confess to acts he did not commit," unquote. Bloomberg News is reporting U.S. officials are in talks with pro-government militias in Yemen about a possible ground offensive to oust Houthi fighters from the Red Sea coast. U.S. aerial attacks on Yemen since mid-March have killed at least 123 people as Houthis vow to continue targeting ships in the region that are tied to Israel's war in Gaza. Last week, a group of Democratic lawmakers called on the Trump administration to halt its attacks on Yemen, citing the War Powers Resolution, which requires congressional approval or a declaration of war to directly attack another country. Protests against Israel's assault on Gaza continue. Over the weekend, tens of thousands of people marched through the Pakistani city of Karachi in solidarity with Palestinians. On Wednesday, police in Berlin violently arrested Palestinian solidarity protesters in front of Humboldt University. That followed similar scenes in the Netherlands on Monday when Dutch police used batons to beat protesters who'd occupied a campus building to demand the University of Amsterdam cut ties with Israeli institutions. In Britain, police arrested 2 people Wednesday as they held a protest on the roof of a factory that supplies hardware to Israel's biggest weapons producer, Elbit Systems. The activists reportedly sabotaged parts inside the Grid Defense Systems factory before climbing to the rooftop and unfurling a banner reading, "Grid and Elbit, blood on your hands."
Are just regular people who oppose genocide, who oppose companies on UK land selling weapons that are used to kill children. In the past month alone, we have seen babies with no heads, children's bodies blown apart.
Bodies, dead weight, literally flying from the sky from how powerful these bombs are that are obliterating entire neighborhoods. We cannot stand back and just do nothing.
In Kentucky, prosecutors are asking a Louisville judge to silence any discussion of genocide or Israel's assault on Palestinians ahead of the June trial of 5 activists who were arrested last year as they blocked entrances to plants operated by Raytheon and BAE Systems, which supply weapons to the Israeli military. The motion also seeks to bar defendants from wearing Palestinian keffiyehs and from holding protests in the vicinity of the courthouse. In Sudan, the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group has declared the formation of a rival government as Sudan enters its 3rd year of a devastating civil war that spawned the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The conflict showing no signs of ending after high-level meetings in London collapsed this week, and the Sudanese army remains engaged in bloody battles with the RSF. At least 300 people were killed in displacement camps over the weekend in the war-ravaged western Darfur region. We'll have more on Sudan later in the broadcast. Human Rights Watch is warning the Tunisian government has turned arbitrary detention into, quote, a cornerstone of its repressive policy, unquote, as President Kais Saied continues to crack down on his opponents and critics. This comes amidst a mass trial against dozens of people, including prominent politicians and media figures who the Saied government has accused of plotting against the state. Last week, 6 detained opposition figures launched a hunger strike while hundreds of protesters took the streets of Tunis.
It's tyranny in every sense of the word. No freedom of opinion, no freedom of expression, no freedom of action. Over the smallest thing, a person finds themselves in prison. Even what I'm saying now could get me arrested and jailed tomorrow. This is reality. I'm not making this up.
In Colombia, Indigenous leader Eric Anderson Menzapavi was shot and killed in the southwest Cauca region on Saturday. He's at least the third Indigenous community leader to be killed in the region this year. Rights groups warn the survival of the Indigenous Nasa people are at heightened risk amidst the systematic attacks. Back here in the United States, California is suing to block President Trump's tariffs, which it says are illegal and economically destructive. This is California Attorney General Rob Bonta.
Trump has had to resort to creating bogus national emergencies that defy reason. He's even claimed there's an influx of illegal immigration and illicit drugs crossing over the Canadian border as the basis for imposing across-the-board tariffs on Canada. It is completely untrue.
In other trade news, President Trump claimed big progress was made in tariff negotiations with Japan after Trump unexpectedly joined the preliminary talks Wednesday. Meanwhile, Italy's far-right Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is at the White House today, where she's expected to defend European trade interests as she meets with Trump. Here in New York, 2 white prison officers were charged with second-degree murder over the killing last month of Messiah Nantwi, a black 22-year-old prisoner who died at the Mid-State Correctional Facility after being viciously beaten by guards. Another 8 officers were charged with related offenses in the fatal beating, which took place during a prison guard wildcat strike. And in Puerto Rico, the Luma Energy Corporation says it could take up to 3 days to restore electricity after the island's energy grid collapsed Wednesday, plunging the entire island, plunging Puerto Rico into darkness for the second time in 4 months. It's the latest in a series of blackouts since Puerto Rico privatized its electrical grid in the wake of Hurricane Maria in 2017. Puerto Ricans pay some of the highest electricity rates in the U.S. despite frequent outages. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.